Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Three of the most famous words in wrestling history. As soon as you hear them, you automatically expect greatness. And indeed, we've got someone great to look at today. However, it's not someone with Hart as a surname. Instead, this Calgary native took a whole other path, one that led her to Japan, where she would become an incredibly successful foreign talent and the original monster heel in Joshi. Today, we're talking about Rhonda Singh, a name who deserves a lot more recognition than she has already. After all, the work and gimmicks she had, briefly, in both WWF and WCW don't exactly do her an awful lot of justice. But in Joshi, where she's the first in a long line of legendary monster heels, she's a majorly important figure. Hall of Fame worthy? Undoubtedly. And it's about time to give her a bit of a retrospective, and to see just how important that work really is. While there will be a bit of touching on Rhonda's work outside of Japan, most of our story here is going to be spent in late 70s and early 80s AJW. So, let's get ripping. Born in 1961 in Calgary, Rhonda Singh's childhood is kinda defined by wrestling fandom. Her family had front row seats to just about every Stampede show back in the 1970s, and she wanted to be a part of wrestling from a very young age. She even went to Ernest Manning High School in Calgary, the same school as Bret and Owen Hart, who were both friends with her. Bret later commented that when he first started wrestling in 1978, Rhonda and her family would be cheering on from the front. It was around this time that Rhonda's wrestling ambitions got well and truly serious. A family holiday to Honolulu introduced her to All Japan Women, which was airing on TV in Hawaii, and it was love at first sight. In a January 2001 interview with Canadian wrestling website Slam, she said she loved it because of the brawling. It was an all-girl company and there they were, blasting each other with chairs and whatnot. Unfortunately, Rhonda Singh was turned down for training at Stampede because they weren't running a women's division, and thusly they didn't train women. But not long after, a friend made her aware of a school in Encino, California, run by the First Lady of Women's Wrestling herself, Mildred Burke. And so, the 17-year-old Rhonda cleared out her bank account, sent in an application complete with bio and photo, and was accepted by Burke immediately. Rhonda Singh's time training with Mildred Burke was, as it goes, kinda brief, although not for any bad reasons. Burke certainly took interest, seeing as Rhonda already had quite the stature at 5'8" and 200 pounds odd. She said that Rhonda could potentially be a female Jack the Ripper of wrestling. Training from the legend was good, even if it did end up being short-lived. Burke was also the booker of foreign talent for All Japan Women, and Rhonda ended up being scouted by AJW in November. As soon as the AJW scouts saw her size, that was basically it. Rhonda remembered them saying, "Hey, a fat girl, we like her." And so yeah, that was that. It was probably around August or September in 1978 when she entered Mildred Burke's school, November when Zenjo scouted and immediately hired her, and on January 4th, 1979, she was wrestling her first match. A Korakuen Hall main event tag team bout against no less a team than the Beauty Pair. Still incredibly green, by her own admission, Rhonda Singh could tie her boots, perform a backdrop, and not a lot else. And yet here she goes. All Japan Women threw her in right at the top. This first match sees Rhonda Singh, under her new name of Monster Ripper, teaming with Mami Kumano against the Beauty Pair team of Jackie Sato and Maki Oida. The Beauty Pair were the stars of 70s AJW, a team who got the company's first huge TV ratings, had hit songs, and even had their own show. Mami Kumano was one of their main antagonists. Usually she teamed with Yumi Ikeshita under the name of the Black Pair, the Beauty Pair's heel equivalents. A lot of this match is all about brawling, which is probably to be expected, although an absolutely heated crowd certainly goes a long way. Generally, when you watch a Beauty Pair bout, you can expect a rather consistent bass noise of schoolgirls screaming their heads off. Now, considering that it's literally Rhonda Singh's professional debut, she acquits herself pretty well. Obviously, she's very green, there are some mistakes, certainly some blatant carrying and all of that, but again, well, it's her first match. She's certainly using her size pretty handily against the Beauty Pair, that's for sure. The big shock, really, is that Monster Ripper and Mami Kumano win the match. A bear hug, a couple of nasty Tree of Woe splashers, and a body slam is enough for the Ripper to win on her pro debut. Winning on a debut like this is something that never happens in pro-res, usually. What of the dojo system, being a young lion, eating nothing but losses for 5 straight years and all of that? Nope, Monster Ripper is going straight up there. Her size is just more than enough for that to happen. Mere weeks after Monster Ripper's shocking debut victory, she faced Jackie Sato in late January 1979. Sato's WWA title is not on the line, but this serves as something of a prelude for what's to come later. The sheer power of the Ripper is certainly apparent. She can cause a hell of a lot of damage just with her body alone, not to mention her ability to perform crunching bear hugs and full Nelsons, or press slam Sato with ease. It's this sort of thing that hadn't been seen much before in Joshi, a level of strength far beyond anyone else in Zenjo. One particularly cool spot sees Ripper trap Sato between herself and the ropes for some vicious body attacks. Quite cool and novel, and it kind of makes you forget that this is someone literally weeks into their pro career. Sato uses her speed to get some hope spots, but soon enough the whole thing becomes chaotic as weapons get used, particularly a big old spanner and a metal bin. The seconds can't help but step in, Jackie gets overheated and takes out the ref when he tries to intervene, and ultimately Ripper is declared victorious by disqualification. Clearly we haven't seen the last of this. For Jackie Sato, a new and seemingly immovable force is going to be coming for her and the red belt. As green as Monster Ripper is, it doesn't take long for her to start making pretty good accounts of herself. There's certainly a few parallels to her in the annals of wrestling. I'd say that the Giant, Paul White, in WCW is a pretty good one, seeing as he only debuted in late 1994, was in WCW mere months later, and eventually won the world title within a year of his pro debut. But it's not surprising, really. Often when you're that sort of size, greenness gets damned to hell in the eyes of the bookers, and Monster Ripper certainly stood out against everyone else on the Zenjo roster. She was going to be a big deal fairly quick. Still, adapting to this whole new situation could be pretty tricky for the young Rhonda, particularly because she did face some early animosity from the established Zenjo talents, who weren't all that willing to help her out and were quite stiff with her in the ring, unaccustomed as they were to losing to foreign talents at all, let alone someone with such little experience or training. Rhonda, by all accounts naturally a very nice person indeed, struggled to deal with this at first and found it very difficult to adapt to the harsh and, quite often, toxic atmosphere that existed in All Japan Women. But in her words, she did get some very helpful advice from a Stampede superstar who'd come over for a New Japan tour. That person being Dynamite Kid. Dino's advice to Rhonda Singh was what you would probably expect. He said to her that in order to get respect, you've got to defend yourself, not take the crap anymore, and give all that stiffness back just as hard. This advice happened to work, and once Rhonda started doing that and getting respect from the native talents, things generally got quite a lot easier. Monster Ripper certainly took the chance that she had to shine, particularly in various early matches that were generally extended squashers. She certainly took well to the task of hand, that being beating up the crowd's favourites. The likes of Mimi Hajiwara and Lucy Kayama tried, but they couldn't compete. Even when the seconds occasionally interfered to try and get shots in on the Ripper, it didn't take long for her to retain the advantage, hit something like a massive press slam or a big torture rack, and get the win. Things are moving very fast indeed, and we soon come to a big career highlight. Not long after Ripper and Kumano's triumph over the beauty pair, the big face team broke up, with Jackie Sato beating Maki Oida in a February 1979 career match. Following this, Monster Ripper would be Sato's main opponent for the rest of 1979 and 1980, feuding over the WWA World title, the biggest prize in AJW, also known as the Red Belt. Monster Ripper would take on Sato, the defending 3WA champ, on July 31st, 1979 in a thoroughly heated match at the Denen Coliseum. The bout is unfortunately cut a fair bit, but Sato holds her own against the Ripper for some time, trying to make this as technical a bout as possible. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. Sato was the top star, and she'd held the title for 637 days by this point. However, the whole complexion of the match changes when the black pair attacks Sato on the outside, leaving her majorly bloodied up. Sato is now barely able to muster anything against the Ripper, even as the audience starts quite literally weeping, and while there's a couple of hope spots, eventually she cannot continue. Monster Ripper is the new WWWA champion. And again, she's just 18 years old, mere months into her professional wrestling career. Like, they're starting at the top, and then there's doing what Monster Ripper did. Monster Ripper's reign would be short, mind you. After just 44 days, she faced Sato in a rematch, this time with no interference. Ripper shows off her strength, again dominating the first half of what would be quite a long bout, although the 36-minute length is cut here to show around about half of the match. Sato is again put in a position where the seconds are having to see to her injuries, making it appear as though once again she may not be able to continue. However, Sato is able to make Ripper miss big. Slowly but surely, Sato gets the advantage in the match, a big body press to the outside causing lots of damage to the Ripper, and a big rush of offense, big clotheslines, a splash, and finally a backdrop hold is enough for Jackie Sato to get the quick pin on Monster Ripper, albeit perhaps a far too quick one, and win back her 3WA title. Still, it was only enough to keep Ripper down for the 3 seconds. The amount of brawling and holding back afterwards suggests that this isn't over by a long chalk. Indeed, the third title match between Jackie Sato and Monster Ripper would take place on the 15th of March 1980 in Kanagawa. The first half or so of this match ends up being some of the most technical work we've seen in the feud so far, an area where Sato undoubtedly has the advantage and is able to put on some telling submissions and get some near falls. Ripper's power moves always have a fair bit of impact when they land, and sometimes she's able to just ragdoll Sato around. However, Sato is also strong enough to land the odd slam on Ripper. That and Ripper is also able to show off some agility, sprinting off the ropes, Vader Bomb style, to drop on Sato. Ripper slingshots Sato to the outside, and at this point all hell breaks loose. The black pair attacks Sato, while Sato's seconds also try to take on Ripper, both attempting to stop the wrestlers from returning to the ring. However, Ripper is able to get back in, while the black pair are too strong for Sato. She can't beat the count, and Monster Ripper is champion for the second time, because titles do change hand by count out here. All these are fine matches, especially if you enjoy the style and the brawling that comes with it. They are certainly, as mentioned, absolutely simmering with heat. The crowds are well and truly deafening for these bouts, make no mistake. Unfortunately, the fourth and final match in this feud, on August 8, 1980, is missing and believed to be lost, which is a shame. However, the end result didn't see a clear winner. By all accounts, this final match descended into absolute chaos with all manner of seconds entering the fray until it was declared a no contest and the 3WA title was held up. It is a little frustrating that we don't end up with a clear winner in this feud, but then that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. However, there is a certain symmetry here in that the feud ends basically as it started in January of 1979, a match that becomes a complete cluster schmoz with no real winner. The feud largely produces good action. It's not necessarily one for technical wrestling, but it is certainly one for hate. Monster Ripper may still be pretty green in a lot of these matches, of course. She's rocketed up the card incredibly quickly after all, but she is certainly carryable for a lot of this. Even at the points where things do get a little sketchy, usually the massive heat in the crowd is enough for it to not matter a whole lot. These matches are certainly worth watching. Jackie Sato would win the title for a third time on December 16, 1980 in a one-night tournament, first defeating Rimi Yokota, later Jaguar Yokota of course, in a classic semi-final, and then conquering Nancy Kumi in the final to take the red belt once again. Sato's last few months in AJW are all about passing the torch over to Yokota as the next big singles face star. She passes said torch by dropping the red belt to Yokota on February 25, 1981, before retiring 3 months later on May 21st. Now, Sato was actually still only 23 at this time, nowhere near the then mandatory AJW retirement age of 26, but Zenjo basically asked Sato to retire early so that she wouldn't be hanging around and taking any shine off the new top program. In case you need reminding, All Japan Women could be a toxic and cruel place, and this is just one example of how fickle the people who ran it were, even going beyond the base bullshit of having the mandatory retirement age in the first place. Unsurprisingly, the new top face would eventually go up against Monster Ripper. While Yokota and Ripper had plenty of tags against each other, and no doubt more singles than what we have available to us, the main match between the two happened on April 7th, 1982 for Yokota's red belt. And yeah, this bout is incredible. Jaguar Yokota is, of course, one of the greatest of them all. As a wrestler, she is just so ridiculously ahead of her time. However, a couple of years down the road, Monster Ripper has improved a hell of a lot since the feud with Sato. She's always had the strong presence, but she's able to project that strength even better, she's developed some technical chops, and naturally she's a lot more experienced. So while Yokota may be taking the lead here, Ripper is a very ideal partner, and the end result here is an outstanding David vs Goliath type battle between the main monster and the big face. All the power moves are so impactful and the comebacks timed so beautifully. Wonderful stuff. Eventually, a big rally from Yokota sees her hit some massive flying drop kicks, disorient the hell out of Ripper with an airplane spin, and finally haul her over with a German suplex for the 3 count. This is most definitely the best bout of Rhonda Singh's career, and she plays a magnificent part of it. Definitely go and watch this one. A big chunk of the latter half of Monster Ripper's first AJW run sees her go against other similarly tough wrestlers, as well as providing more of a tricky task for some of the hotter younger wrestlers coming up, like the Crush Gals. One particular match of note here is a November 1983 bout against Devil Masami. This would be the first chain match in the history of AJW. As you might expect, there's a fair bit of brawling here, and while it's not exactly the best match in the whole of this video, you do get some pretty cool moments here and there. Eventually, Masami gets the win by trapping Ripper in the ropes, wrenching her arm, and forcing a submission. By the time we get to 1985, Monster Ripper herself, now often using a fair bit of face paint, is passing the torch to a new crop of sadistic monster heels. Dump Matsumoto, Bull Nakano, and the Atrocious Alliance are here, and they're going to be in the top heel spot. Monster Ripper and Dump Matsumoto would often take on each other in tag team action, a battle to see just which of these monsters was the toughest, but usually Dump would come out on top, and it is about here where Ripper's first Zenjo run comes to an end. Through that time she'd certainly made a whopping impact, winning the red belt twice, being a part of some very famous feuds, and improving greatly as a wrestler along the way. She started out at a quite phenomenal high on the card, way over pushed considering that she was literally a novice, but as evidenced by the later matches against Jackie Sato, other strong bouts against folks like Nancy Kumi, Lioness Asuka and Noriota Teno, and particularly the brilliant 82 match with Jaguar Yokota, she got way better over time. Now, it was often the case when talking about Monster Ripper that there's kind of a big gap between this one in AJW and the later entry into WWF as Bertha Faye, almost as if she didn't do anything during that time. However, that is most certainly not the case. There's plenty of action to talk about between 1985 and 1995 as Rhonda Singh wrestled around the world, not to mention returning to Japan and AJW during this time. There was, of course, something of a homecoming. Rhonda had first appeared on Stampede wrestling cards in 1983 between trips to Japan and Mexico, but when Stampede decided to make women's wrestling a regular thing on their cards in the mid-late 80s, they would naturally give her a call. In Stampede, she was dubbed as Rhonda Singh with an H on the end. The idea here was to pair her up with the great Gamma Singh, one of the company's top heels, although this didn't really happen. Rhonda Singh was awarded Stampede's Women's Championship in 1987 after defeating Wendy Richter in Puerto Rico, more on that in a little bit, and held the title for a good while before losing it to Chigusa Nagayo in 1988. And even though the Stampede territory was pretty much on the way out at this point, it's probably fair to say that this was her favourite place to work, being that it's her hometown and all. In 2001, she said that Stampede was the best territory anyone could work in, the people she met there were all still her friends, everyone had a good time and there were no problems in the dressing room. As far as backstage went, Rhonda Singh was essentially one of the boys, preferring to be in the same locker room as them, and indeed most of the big names in Stampede are the folks who were amongst her closest friends in the biz, including the aforementioned Gamma Singh, the Hearts and Bad News Allen. Mexico and Puerto Rico were also regular spots for Rhonda Singh. In Mexico, she wrestled both in EMLL during the late 80s and a couple of years in AAA in the early 90s, where she would be billed either as Monster Ripper or La Monstra. She wrestled as Monster Ripper in Puerto Rico's WWC for a fair bit of time in the late 80s and early 90s, and it's here where she'd have another one of her more famous feuds, this time against Wendy Richter. Back when Richter was in WWF, before the infamous double cross, there was an idea of running Ripper versus Richter there. However, Fabulous Moolah wanted half of their money as a booking fee, and Rhonda Singh balked utterly at that. And so, it happens here in Puerto Rico, and it ends up going damn well. Richter and Ripper have several quite lengthy, for Western women's wrestling, and highly heated bouts, including one inside a steel cage. There's some pretty cool stuff here, especially seeing as they're usually given more than the 5 or so minutes that women's wrestling would often get in US promotions around this time. And of course, throughout most of this period, Monster Ripper was still doing work in Japan. It's not talked about as much as her early 80s one, but she would return to All Japan Women in the early 90s. Before that, Ripper was first enticed back to Joshi by the formation of the original JWP in 1986. Jackie Sato was a big part of the formation of this promotion, one that would happily welcome wrestlers over AJW's retirement age, designed to finally bring some competition to Zenjo's door, which it most certainly did. Monster Ripper didn't do an awful lot in JWP, as it appears she was only there for a short time. The idea of bringing her in appears to have been to rekindle the flame and do a rerun of Ripper vs Sato, but this didn't really happen, mainly because Sato herself didn't spend too long in JWP. She got into it somewhat with a young Shinobu Kandori, culminating in an infamous shoot incident on July 18, 1987, when Kandori and Sato started firing serious live rounds at each other in a bout. Shinobu Kandori had legit martial arts chops and, well, this didn't go well for Sato, basically. She left JWP soon after and retired from the ring, this time for good, in 1988. This is something that's probably worth covering in more detail if I ever look at shoot incidents in wrestling again, but I digress. Monster Ripper also wrestled a few matches in Atsushi Onita's nascent FMW in 1989, this time under a new name, Delta Dawn. Now the name seemed intriguing. I wondered if this would be some sort of proto-Bertha Faye thing, what with there being the country song of the same name and all that, but it's not really. It is still very much in Monster Ripper land. Anywho, she'd largely wrestle against the Greek talent Despina Montagas. Here we're seeing the pair go at it in a strap match on FMW's December 1989 Battle Creation show. In 1991, with All Japan Women in a period of transition from the Crush Gals and Atrocious Alliance years into the heady days of 1992 and onwards, and with any age restrictions now dropped, Monster Ripper would make a return to Zenjo in 1991, largely with the aim of taking on some of the new and younger monsters that were kicking around. It is perhaps appropriate that her return bout, or at least the first we can track down here, sees her taking on a 20-year-old Aja Khan who's on her way to the top. This 21st April 91 bout has just the sort of start you'd want, lots of hatred, and it doesn't take long for the toys to come out, both Kong and Ripper striking at each other with metal boxes and chairs. It's rare for Aja Khan to meet someone in Zenjo who is of similar stature to her, and Ripper is occasionally able to throw Khan around, even hitting a pretty sweet double-arm suplex. However, it only takes a few minutes for things to descend into chaos. Aja does nail 2 urakens, but Ripper's able to get a foot on the ropes. From there, both grab weapons and clash them about, hitting the ref with them when the poor sod tries to intervene. A no contest is declared at the 9.5 minute mark, although this hardly stops the fight. They still go at it, even as many seconds and officials try to keep them apart. It gets a bit odd from there. The pair appears to agree to 5 more minutes, but after Ripper beats on Aja a bit more, well, she kinda just buggers off, so this 5 more minutes didn't even really start. We do get a bit more fighting and more pulling apart after this, but it is all a bit of a mess. Rather disappointing after a hot start that we get this sort of overbooked cluster schmuzz, and the crowd, who clearly just wanted to see this pair duke it out, boos the hell out of most of this. A shame, really, especially as we don't really get another Khan vs Ripper singles bout. The main focus of this second run ends up being Monster Ripper going against the top woman of the day in AJW, that being Bull Nakano, who'd held the red belt since January of 1990. On the 29th of April 1991, a few days after the Kong match, Ripper faces Nakano for the 3WA title at Korakuen Hall. This ends up being a pretty good one. It's certainly not a technical classic, but it is for sure a brawl, complete with Monster Ripper kicking off proceedings nicely by choking and chucking a round ball with all of the streamers that are still in the ring. Both of the wrestlers end up bleeding, chairs are used, rows of them are put to the sword, we get the nunchucks. There's a lot of fighting here, and quite a lot packed into what's only around 11 minutes. As much as Zenjo is very much heading towards quite technical and intricate bouts at this time, Monster Ripper's second one sees her in a good role as essentially a throwback to the brawl-focused wrestling of the 1980s. In the end though, Nakano is able to eke out a win. Ripper gets deadly close with a powerbomb, but misses a senton, and Nakano quickly takes advantage with the somersault leg drop to get her free. Bruised, but still the champ. This, however, most certainly isn't over. The really big date of this second one, and indeed perhaps the most epic bout in the career of Monster Ripper, happens on November 21st, the main event of one of AJW's big yearly shows, WrestleMarine Pad. This is a tag team steel cage bout pitting the rather uneasy team of Monster Ripper and Bull Nakano against Aja Kong and Bison Kimura, and it takes place under last woman standing rules. The other team must basically be knocked out. Suffice it to say, this is a big old brawl. All the weapons you can eat, the cage getting used aplenty, and naturally quite a bit of claret. A storyline going into this match is that Aja Kong is carrying an injury to her stomach, so obviously that's something Ripper and Bull focus on. While Kong doesn't usually wear white, it certainly puts a lot of focus on the bleeding. Again, don't expect anything in the way of technical action here, because it's not going to happen. It is fun if, like me, you enjoy a good brawl, but your mileage may vary. The crucial moment comes when Aja and Kimura are able to get the monsters down. Bison Kimura hits a splash off the top of the cage, Aja goes for a big one off the cage on Bull, but she misses. Aja basically gets eliminated here. This, combined with the stomach injury, absolutely takes her out of the action, leaving Kimura alone to deal with this team. She tries, but it's way too much. After a few more minutes, a couple of splashes leave her knocked out. The Ripper and Nakano team win, but almost immediately when the bell has rung, yeah, there was kind of obviously going to be a turn here, wasn't there? Ripper blindsides Nakano, beats the hell out of her, and the second match is on. Ripper is challenging for the red belt right frickin' now after a quite long and rather savage cage bout. Once again, weapons all over the shop. The already bloody Nakano takes even more punishment here, and the task appears to be insurmountable. Powerbombs and the like seem to get ever closer to taking her out, but then one glimpse of an opportunity allows Bull to hit a huge German suplex. From there, Bull goes up to the top of the cage and hits the absolutely huge guillotine leg drop off of it. This is enough to put Monster Ripper down for the count. In the end, this whole thing goes for a little over 35 minutes. It's certainly long, and I feel that in particular the section where Bull and Ripper just relentlessly beat up on Kimura could probably have been shortened, but it is certainly a big moment for Nakano. That top rope leg drop is most certainly worth the price of admission, that's for sure. On the whole, a pretty fine watch. This brings an end to Monster Ripper's time in All Japan Women. There are a couple of other matches, including one where she gets a win over Akira Hakuto, but her final match in the company happens on the 26th of November, when the team of Nakano, Hakuto and Bat Yoshinaga defeat the kind of random team of Ripper, Minami Toyota and Suzuka Minami. This is a short one, but one that does serve a purpose. A legendary monster returns, a master of the old styles, the old ways of brawling that provide a new test for this generation, but she eventually gets overcome. It is a handy role indeed, and we do get quite a bit of fun out of it. Anything technical does go entirely out of the window, and Ripper perhaps doesn't quite move as well as she did 10 years previously, but that is understandable. She can still brawl with the best of them even if there is a bit of wear and tear. With this finished, the next couple of years for Rhonda Singh were largely spent in Mexico with AAA. As mentioned, she did a fair bit of work as La Monstra in Mexico, entirely as a Rudo and as part of a stable called Las Nasty Girls with La Briosa and Neftali, with Lola Gonzalez being a particularly regular opponent for her. Again, she's very prolific here, although there's not as much footage available here as one would hope. And then, in early 1995, the call came from Titan Towers. So yeah, we obviously have to talk about Bertha Faye a bit. One thing that does need to be remembered is that what Bertha Faye would become certainly wasn't the original plan for her. That original plan was much more in the vein of Monster Ripper. Rhonda Singh was, it appears, brought into WWF on Alundra Blazer's recommendation. Their paths would have certainly crossed either in JWP or AJW, where she'd wrestled as Medusa. WWF was still serious about the women's division, and Rhonda debuted on the April 3rd, 1995 Raw, straight after Alundra Blaze had won her title back off Bull Nakano. She attacks her after the match, and her presentation is, well, it's Monster Ripper, basically. Makeup, power moves, the lot. The idea here is that Ripper attacks Blaze to take her off television while Alundra got some cosmetic surgeries, would then feud with Nakano in that time, and then go against the returning Blaze in the summer. However, Bull Nakano gets fired from WWF almost immediately after this due to cocaine possession, going back to All Japan Women. This pretty much scuppers the idea of the women's division being taken seriously, and we get the repackaging soon after. Here's Bertha Faye, complete with terrible unflattering costume and Harvey Whippleman as manager. The in-ring here is largely miserable, of course. Things are basically focused on comedy now, which doesn't help matters. The matches she had outside of Alundra Blaze could be rather terrible indeed. Her debut against Pantera on a May Raw coming in for special derision, and the matches that she and Blaze had weren't that good either. The pair didn't really get on at all out of the ring, and didn't have much chemistry in the ring. Bertha Faye and Harvey Whippleman didn't have much chemistry either. Again, they just didn't really get on outside the ring. Still, Rhonda did generally get on with most everyone else from the sounds of things. Again, she was still one of the boys, and she particularly got on with Owen Hart, loving the Rocket's litany of jokes. That and, as mentioned by Brett in his tribute to Rhonda, she would readily put a more established woman in her place if she noticed they were bullying the younger talents. As far as backstage goes, it's hard indeed to find the slightest of bad words about Rhonda, as she's as nice as they come. On the Grappling with Canada podcast, longtime wrestling photographer Dr. Mike Lano said that she was someone who'd always bring extra water, sewing kits, all sorts to the back for everyone. She was up for the partying and whatnot, and a total wrestling nerd who could happily chat about the slightest minutiae of women's wrestling history for Canada if needed. It kinda goes without saying that Rhonda hated the Bertha Faye gimmick. It wasn't her identity and was completely different to anything she'd done as Monster Ripper, which was far more her style. Rhonda was a big horror fan. It begs the question, is there ribbing going on here with this gimmick? Inside jokes, Dusty Rhodes style? There aren't many Berthas in wrestling history, it must be said, although there is Bertha von Raschke, which, yes, was Baron von Raschke in a very poor disguise that allowed him to second Rick Martel in 1985 AWA. Is it reaching to suggest that the Bertha Faye gimmick is referencing that? Very possibly, but then this is WWF and Vince McMahon we're talking about here. Largely, Rhonda's time in WWF felt, almost in her own words, as if she was prostituting herself for Vince out there, and there was basically nothing happening on the storyline front. Just going out there, doing crap for a couple of minutes, and getting a check. As for the general timeline of matches, that's fairly straightforward. Bertha Faye does win the women's title from Blaze at SummerSlam, and then loses it back after 57 days on an episode of Raw. There is one last gasp of the women's division being taken seriously when Aja Khan and others are brought in for Survivor Series, but Blaze gets fired not long after. We get the infamous women's title being dumped in the bin on Nitro, and that's the end of that. Obviously there's not much else for Bertha Faye to do, and she asks for her release soon after, with the Survivor Series match where her team beat Alundra's team being her last match in the company. It is quite the shame indeed that this is what Rhonda Singh is largely known for, at least when it comes to the West. It's a dreadful gimmick, the wrestling is awful, and yeah, there's just not anything good here. There is one other little thing worth pointing out though, something that's a personal achievement for her more than anything, that she talked about in early 2001 with Slam Wrestling. There was one thing she was really focused on when she was in WWF, an ambition to wrestle at Madison Square Garden. She got to do that on the 6th of October 1995. She entered MSG as the champion and left there as the champion, having had what she thought was one of the better matches she'd had with Blaze. This was, at the very least, one little highlight of her time in the Fed. The next couple of years for Rhonda were largely spent in the Can-Am Wrestling Federation. There were thoughts of returning to Japan, but the state of Joshi over there meant that payouts weren't exactly guaranteed anymore, so that didn't happen. And then she ended up in WCW around late 1999. Again, there's not exactly much good to say here. Very little wrestling at all to speak of, a couple more matches with Medusa, a feud with Miss Elizabeth, and generally being used as comic relief. Probably one of the more infamous segments here is a Vince Russo standards and practices bit, where he complains that ratings are down because he can't call Rhonda Singh fat. Still, Rhonda wasn't too negative about WCW. She said in January 2001 that they were an upfront organisation and they knew exactly what they wanted her to do. It doesn't appear as though Rhonda did any wrestling after WCW, meaning that her final match took place on May 5th, 2000 against Miss Elizabeth on Thunder, where she ended up getting racked by Lex Luger. She didn't officially retire as such, and did say in January 2001 that she wouldn't hesitate to return to another major promotion. It didn't really matter as long as she was paid and treated fairly. On the state of the ladies divisions back then, she bemoaned that a lot of ladies could only work 5 minutes, or they only knew 5 moves, largely because not a whole lot more was expected, but that everyone had the potential to do more. She said that if they went to Japan, they'd come back great. They had the bodies, but they needed the ring sense. At this time, Rhonda was working as a caregiver. Sadly, Rhonda Singh passed away suddenly on July 27, 2001. She was only 40 years old. The cause of death was a heart attack, attributed by the family to medical problems. It's another deeply sad premature death in the wrestling business. When Rhonda passed, there were a lot of comparisons made between her and Terry Gordy. They were nearly the same age as each other, with Rhonda being only a couple of months older. Both achieved great success in wrestling before they'd even hit their 20s. Both were particularly successful in Japan, where they were monstrous and influential heels. This success wasn't necessarily reflected in their respective WWF and WCW runs, and in the end both sadly passed far too soon. Gordy died on July 16th, 11 days before Rhonda. While there are differences, there are certainly comparisons to be made when it comes to the impact they had in Japan and their natural abilities. Both were very effective indeed in their role, and Rhonda in particular is the first important monster heel in all of Joshi, the start of an incredible line that includes Dump Matsumoto, Bull Nakano, Aja Khan, and many others. Indeed, as acknowledged by Bret Hart, she was the first Calgary-born wrestler to make it big on an international stage, way before any Hart did. Her funeral was attended by well over 100 people, with many wrestlers in attendance including Bret and other Hart family members, Gamma Singh and Bad News Allen. And perhaps the last words here are best left to the Hitman, who paid tribute to Rhonda in his weekly Slam Wrestling column. I drove by Rhonda last week, saw her walking on Bow Trail. I wish I hadn't been in such a hurry that day and had stopped to say hello. It's sad when the roar of the crowd fades, leaving too many wrestlers with memories greater than their dreams. Bye for now.